One day, a young and rich heiress decided to amuse herself and get to know better a new charismatic schoolteacher who turned out to be a writer. Love for literature brought them together not only on a spiritual level. The heroine of the movie was inspired by the teacher's example. She wrote a bold story in which they had the main roles. The story helped the man to release the tension, and when the writer's wife and the school principal found out, the man's life changed dramatically. It's Mr. Narrator and a new retelling. Watch on to find out how a special story of a schoolgirl changed the life of lovers. Enjoy the video. The movie begins as the heroine, Cairo Smith, is inspired to write a story. However, it doesn't work out for her. The girl wants to become a writer. She lives alone in a large Level Hill house in the backwoods of Tennessee. Every morning, Cairo walks to school through the woods. This morning, she hopes to meet a real writer, Jonathan Miller. The professor has started teaching literature classes at her school. Before class began, Miller brought a bouquet of flowers into the classroom. He was surprised when a student showed up to class an hour early. The characters met. Miller's course was recommended to the girl by her friend Winnie. The professor gave Cairo a list of literature. However, the girl had already read all the books on the list. Winnie entered the classroom. The girl suggested that her friend go get some snacks. Cairo offered to bring something to the teacher. The man politely declined. The girls walked out of the auditorium. Miller looked at the books that lay on the heroine's desk. He was surprised to see one book on the table. Boris Fillmore, a friend of the teacher, walked into the auditorium. The man took the book from Jonathan's hands and began to read aloud. This confused Miller. Coach brought the professor a snack. Boris wanted to play a joke on Jonathan. They found various books in the girls' things. Among them was one that Miller himself had written. Beatrice, Miller's wife, was working in the parlor. She also writes short stories. Jonathan suggested that she celebrate the professor's first day of school. They discussed the books Miller's students were reading. The couple's conversation was interrupted by a phone call from Amy, Beatrice's editor. While his wife chatted with the editor, the man made cocktails and turned on music. Beatrice kept her husband company at the bar. They discussed a Henry Miller book they had once read. The conversation stirred up the couple's memories. They decided to have a little fun. When the heroes wanted to continue the dance in the bedroom, Beatrice received another call from the editor. After the weekend, the professor was having coffee with his friend at the stadium. They looked toward the forest. Boris joked about the ghosts that live in the fog. Cairo came out of the forest. The men were curious about what kind of music the heroine listened to. Fillmore treated his student to a cookie. The coach made his own baked goods. Miller was curious if the girl was afraid to walk through the woods alone. Cairo believed that she was the only scary creature in the forest. In the hallway of the school, Winnie was getting her things from her locker. She noticed the teacher and caught the man's attention. The girl wanted to go back to Coach Fillmore's class. Winnie was flirting with the teacher. From around the corner, Cairo was watching them. The heroine was amused by her friend's tricks. Winnie confessed that she would like to get to know the man better. Cairo was surprised. Her friend had a particular relationship preference. After class, the girls went to relax in Level Hall. They smoked and discussed their secrets. Cairo was writing an admissions essay on her most significant accomplishment. Winnie suggested several topics to her friend. However, nothing came up. Then the friend suggested that Cairo have some new experience to write about in the essay. As an example, she cited the topic of a close relationship between a teacher and a student. The heroine suggested that Winnie wanted to seduce Fillmore. The friend told Cairo about how she imagines her first time with a man. The girl wanted to spend it with Boris. She was sure that an experienced man would be able to give her pleasure. Winnie suggested that Miller might be a good option for Cairo. That confused the heroine. Winnie admitted that she would like to have fun with Cairo. Later, the heroine read her teacher's book. Time passed. Cairo watched her teacher in class. Miller enjoyed explaining his subject to the student. One day he asked Cairo to stop by his house after class. After class, Fillmore stopped by to chat with Jonathan. In the evening, the friends had an appointment. Boris wanted to cheer up his friend. The coach showed Miller the Roger Rabbit dance and left. Miller turned on the music and began to dance. The man was caught doing this by Cairo. The man asked the heroine about her future plans. Cairo wanted to go to Yale. The teacher suggested the girl to go to a poetry evening in Tennessee. He discussed with the student her story about a sluggish spider. Cairo was surprised when Miller quoted her work. Jonathan thought Cairo was talented. He asked her to write something in the style of her favorite author. The girl admitted to reading his book. She quoted her favorite passage from the book. Miller admitted that he'd lost his inspiration after his marriage. Their conversation was interrupted by Winnie. That evening, Fillmore met the Millers at a cafe. Winnie served their table. Beatrice was interested in her husband's students. Fillmore told his friend about Cairo. The woman watched as the men discussed the heroine. The friends talked about the teaching profession. Beatrice said her husband was a good teacher. She thought writing was not for Jonathan because he had stopped writing. The man was saddened by his wife's words. Cairo attended a Tennessee Young Talent event. She wanted to meet the professor here. The man approached her suddenly. He sat down next to the heroine on the couch. Miller told the girl about the people who gathered at the evening. The heroes listened attentively to the guy speaking on the stage. Then, they went out on the veranda to smoke. The next day, Cairo brought coffee to the men at the stadium. Heroine suggested that the coach make a brand for his cookies. Winnie could make a logo for his brand. Fillmore left for class. Jonathan stayed at the stadium with Cairo. They developed their own special sign language. Jonathan thought the student was cute. Miller later corresponded with his wife. Beatrice wanted to have a fun weekend. Winnie questioned her friend about how the teacher perceived her new look. After class, Cairo wanted to talk to the professor about her future job. She chose Henry Miller as her author. The professor was impressed. He thought this author's style was provocative and difficult to repeat. His books were not included in the literature course. The girl convinced the teacher of her choice. He allowed her to write in Henry Miller's style. Winnie watched her friend's conversation. The professor went to his wife. The friend demonstrated to the heroine how it was worthwhile to communicate with the teacher. Boris walked into the auditorium. He saw what Winnie was doing on Miller's desk. Boris enlisted the students' help in selling cookies. Cairo lost her cell phone. Coach and Winnie exchanged contact. Jonathan returned home to spend the weekend with his wife. He was waiting for Beatrice. The woman resolved issues with Amy on the phone. Cairo called the teacher. She asked the man to return her phone. Miller drove to the girl's home in Level Hill. It started to rain. Cairo walked out on the porch in an evening gown. The man motioned for her to come up to him in the rain. They kissed. In the evening, the heroine wrote a story. Jonathan was working at his laptop. Meeting with the student inspired the man. He and his wife did not go on vacation. The professor received a letter from the heroine. Beatrice was distracted by the sound of incoming messages on the professor's laptop. She asked Miller not to interfere with her work. The man secluded himself in the annex. He printed out Cairo's story. The girl's work impressed the writer. The student wrote a bold story in the spirit of the author she had taken as an example. In Jonathan's imagination, he and Cairo relieved the tension together. In reality, the professor helped himself relax while reading the story. On Monday, the heroine was walking to school through the woods as usual. She was waiting for Miller in the auditorium. The teacher had asked Cairo to choose another author. He thought her story was too explicit. The girl was surprised by the teacher's reaction. The heroine wanted to get an explanation from the professor. However, Jonathan decided to put their relationship within the framework of the educational framework. Cairo believed that Miller deliberately pretended to be a man without inspiration. The girl's words touched something inside the writer. Cairo went home through the woods. The girl was distressed. In the evening, Miller told his wife that he had had a bad day. The heroine was drinking at her house with Winnie. She shared with her friend her thoughts about Jonathan. At the same time, Miller told his wife about what Cairo had written. She was surprised that Jonathan had allowed her to take an author who was not included in the school's curriculum. The woman wanted to read her husband's student's story. He gave Beatrice a printout of the heroine's story. Beatrice asked her husband to describe Miller's character in Cairo's story in her own words. The heroine suggested that her friend write to the coach. Beatrice liked the way her husband quoted the girl's story. The couple decided to release the tension. The woman pleased her husband. At the moment of their active rest, Boris came to the Millers. Winnie wrote a message to the coach. The man was flattered by the attention of the student. Beatrice was interested in the messages of a friend. However, Fillmore did not admit with whom he corresponds. To increase the degree of correspondence, Cairo suggested that her friend send the teacher a candid photo. The girls took off their t-shirts and kissed. Then Winnie sent the photo to the coach. Cairo had no intention of sending the photo to Jonathan. She sent her story to the school principal, Joyce Manor. Principal Joyce called the writer's wife. She wanted to talk to Miller. Beatrice handed the phone to her husband. Boris left. Miller told Beatrice that the principal had received a student's story. The text of the story looked compromising in the eyes of the public. The woman began to suspect her husband of cheating. She thought teenage girls were dangerous. And from the men's accounts, it was clear that Jonathan was singling out the female student from the others. At school, Winnie approached Miller. She was looking for Cairo. The teacher did not see the heroine and asked not to be disturbed. Joyce Manier communicated separately with Cairo and Miller. The heroines shared the story of their relationship with the principal. The girl told about the time they spent together with the teacher. Jonathan realized that the principal censored what was happening between the student and the professor. After class, Miller and Fillmore talked about the girls. A friend believed that Jonathan had a crush on a female student. The man was suspended from class. The professor told his wife about everything. Beatrice thought that her husband was paying for giving the student hope. Jonathan convinced his wife that there was no relationship between him and Cairo. Beatrice was angry. The woman was sure her husband wanted to get to know a student better. Winnie came to see Cairo. The girl was writing an essay for the university. The friend wanted to know the reason why the heroine destroys Miller's life. Winnie asked Cairo to stop the game. The heroine threatened Winnie. She had dirt on her friend and coach. Cairo considered what was happening as her greatest accomplishment. The situation with Miller gave a boost to the heroine's writing. She read the continuation of her story to her friend. At this time, Jonathan was inspired to write a new story. The next day, he put it on the student's desk. The girl became imbued with the writer's work. After class, they met again at the stadium. Cairo forgave Jonathan. This was the movie Miller's Girl 2024. Write in the comments, would you, if you were the heroine, seek a fair evaluation of her work at any cost? Do you think the writer found his inspiration after meeting Cairo? See you in the next retellings.